Section 3 was lit up and nearing completion, but as I didn't yet have the 1x2 bricks for the floor of the deep pit, I moved on to Section 4 and getting the facade in place. I had previously put together the lower facade, but had since moved and reconfigured the shapes and backing plates, so the work had to be redone. While doing this, I realised I'd forgotten to add in a support for a tile under the left side of the rock, which had previously been supported by the grass of the segment I'd split from Section 4 and attached to Section 3. This was a deceptively tricky task, as there was a plate and a half gap between the plates the rock was attached to and the tile I wanted to add, and only one module space to the facade behind the rock. I tried several combinations of brackets, but didn't have any luck. I tried extending the framework underneath the rock, but wasn't sure there was enough space below 4 studs sticking out the back of the rock's foundation, which was why I'd cut out the frame to start with. I could have technically added the tile to the end of Section 3, but that would have left a single tile sticking out the end of Section 3. As I was having no luck attaching brackets to the base of the modified bricks, I wondered if I'd have more luck replacing the brick with a recently introduced variant with studs on the back. Ideally, I wanted multiple studs connected to the tile to keep it stable, but the only working solution I found had just a single connection point. It'd do the job, just not to be touched. Continuing the facade work, I spent almost 20 minutes tiling a plate, only to find out it was the wrong sized plate and I'd have to redo it. Fun. There were a few other minor issues to contend with while building the facade. The first was a gap where there shouldn't have been a gap, which I found was caused by an extra row of plates added for strength, so these had to be thinned back down. Second was a slight misalignment and delicacy of the wall, which I fixed by lengthening the flanking wall sections and adding a couple of studs to keep the central wall held in place better. Third was a little more complicated, as I realised I hadn't included a way to attach grass across the top of the facade, and there wasn't room for connectors behind the top row of tiles. Installing additional lift arms would only leave room for one layer of backing plates, which wasn't much of an issue except for where I had connectors fixing the gear rack in place. Here I needed plates to come up and over the connectors, which I could do with corner plates, but I'd have to sacrifice a connector. I was getting very close to completing the project at this point, even considering the possibility of finishing during the next session, until I remembered that I still needed to install a simple mechanism to rotate a large gold ring I'd created for the end of the level. I'd been quietly working on the ring design in the background, as I'd been struggling to create something that looked effective. I really liked the curved yellow windscreens, but I couldn't find a suitable method of holding them together and closing the loop. My second design with curved bricks had a full ring, but still I needed a way to hold the bricks together and then connect them to a mechanism to rotate them. I'd need at least a plate gap between sides of the ring, unless I were to use an illegal technique, but even using illegal techniques I'd still need a central point to connect to a drive shaft. Using only a single plate between the two sides would mean alternating which bricks were connected, effectively dividing the ring into quarters, then somehow connecting the plates to hold the ring together. Increasing the distance between sides to 2 plates would allow me to properly connect the 4 bricks per side together, while still needing a way to join the plates. I went through a number of different connectors and plates trying to find anything that would work, but everything had its flaws. Too long, too short, spaced too close or too wide, and I still needed to connect it to a drive shaft to make it spin, for which a central point would be best. A long bar with plate seemed the best candidate to hold the ring up, as it was thinner than an axle and clear to make the ring appear to float. I made a little headway using plates with bars and clips, which I found could connect all parts of the ring together with a 1.5 plate gap between sides. I found I had a few rounded bricks to test the method. It was quite delicate, but it was holding together. In order to give the ring a more hollow appearance, I was planning to blend the centre colours with the background, something I seemed to have forgotten when I placed a large mountain and trees in the way. I still wanted to keep the mountain, so I wound up moving it left of the ring, then I could create a large blue space next to it. I asked one of my regular viewers for feedback here, and they suggested using round plates to cover the ring's centre completely. After moving the mountain over, I didn't really like the steep drop-off needed to add blue sky behind the ring, but if I was covering over the centre of the ring, I could maybe make the centre and the background dark brown. Unfortunately, Lego doesn't make dark brown round tiles, so I had to make do with plates. This seemed like a much better idea, as I could match the design to part of the in-game background. Following this session, I did a slight redesign of the ring, using a 16-module windsurfer mast to hold the two sides together. The result was a little more stable and gave me a single bar down the centre, but at the expense of making it a little thicker and looking a bit like a macaron. With the background and ring designed, I needed to add in a drivetrain to rotate the ring. I'd identified the best place for this being between two segments of framework, which could couple with the drive shaft that moved the egg wrecker. I had a brief period thinking this may still require some moderate frame modification and relocating two other gears to fit two beveled gears in place, until I spotted that I could use a simple gear coupling connector. It thankfully wasn't too difficult retroactively installing the drivetrain, but once I had, I realised I'd made a slight mistake. A few weeks earlier, when I'd chosen where the ring would go, I'd anticipated needing to gear down the drivetrain to have the ring spin slowly, but this had slipped my mind while designing it, resulting in mild destruction. Entering my gear combinations into a calculator told me I had a 1 to 2.5 ratio, which was obviously far too high. Unfortunately, lowering the ratio appropriately would require beveled gears far larger than I could reasonably fit in the framework, but I could possibly move this new drivetrain higher and install another pair of gears before it. I set out modifying the design, which was a fairly simple job of moving over two older gears and moving up most of the new drivetrain, before I remembered that 8-tooth gears don't work with chains. Lowering the new gears to the point where the 8-tooth gear would mesh with the 40-tooth put them right in line with part of the framework that I really didn't want to physically rip apart to reconfigure, so I tried placing the gears next to each other. It took a while reconfiguring gears and connectors, but I eventually managed to fit everything into the space I had available. But while digitally making changes can require very little effort to do, making changes physically can quickly become much bigger jobs. For a start, I found that I'd used a longer axle through my worm gear housing than I had in the design, which meant having to pull apart the housing to change the axle and connectors. Of course, I didn't want to carefully fully dismantle framework, as that's too time consuming. It was also hard work moving over the leg I'd relocated to fit new gears in, as some pins could only be removed by lifting frames up off them with the weight of the backdrop resting on them. It's no wonder I've split so many connectors. It's hard work being lazy. The lower speed was much more appropriate, but I still wanted to reduce it just a little further, so I swapped a 12-tooth gear for a 20-tooth. This speed felt about right, so I could finally put all the new, not quite complete facade work in place to get a look at it. Uh-oh. We've jammed. That's not good. Will it ever just work first time? With some poking and prodding, I managed to free up whatever was causing the jam. Briefly. I still don't know what the issue was, or why the one-way mechanism started tearing itself apart. Every part of the drivetrain moved freely, and removing gears to take the big ring out the equation still didn't get it running. So for some reason, gears which ran without issue were now separating, leading me to swapping in an L-shaped lift arm, but this allowed the whole mechanism to twist. So I tried 3 individual lift arms pinned to the frame, but I couldn't actually physically install them in such a configuration. So much for finishing next session.